Hello everyone, today I'm going to demonstrate to you how to measure and estimate your fabric for any window treatment. I'll give you everything you need to know to write a work order if you have someone else make your curtain or do it yourself. So these are the 5 things that you need, and it's really just 5. You need to know that your rod, that's the face of your rod, just the front. You need to know your return. That's the distance from the wall to the front of your rod. It's called projection. Okay, and then you need to know overlap. That's if you have a pair, it's where they meet in the middle. And of course your finished length. And then pin setting. We'll go over the pin settings a little later in the video because I have a sample I can show you. It'll be easier to understand. Okay, so let's start with this overlap. So you have a crack of light right here. Now if you have a traverse rod, it's going to have something that looks about like this. This is your overlap, your master carrier that provides your overlap on a traverse rod, So for that overlap, you would need to know the distance from these 2 little holes. There'll be a little hole here for your pin to slip into, and a little hole back here. This is the carrier that attaches to your string if you have a cord draw, like that. So you would need that measurement for your overlap in that situation. In this situation, these rings won't pass by each other. So what we do for overlap here, if it gets too big and it's not attached to something up there, it'll fall. And it'll make the center of your drape look really rough. So with a small overlap like this, your side hem will stiffen that and make it stand up there like it's supposed to and not droop. So with a ring application, you can try to keep this overlap to about 2.5 inches. Okay, for your return, you'll have one on each end, so when you factor these numbers, you have to do it twice, once for each end. Then you have this crack of light. Now, if you got neighbors that can see through here, or if you like a dark room when you're sleeping and you want this to go back to the wall. So you measure from the wall to the front of your rod, that's your projection. That's what your your return should be, is that measurement right there. Now with the rings, you really don't have nothing to hang it on back there. With the traverse rod, it's built in a place to hook this up. Right here like this, we would put a little eyelet in the wall right up there and hook this in there, and then it would stand just like that. So you want to make sure you allow yourself enough fabric. I already did my measurements, so I know this treatment should be, for a closing, fully functional drape, should be 4 widths. Now, this one, because it's decorative, we only put 3. So it's missing a half a width. Which means, when you close them, they don't go all the way. So always make sure you give yourself enough fabric. One other thing to note. If you have a pattern, you have to know the width of your fabric to get your yardage. So if you have a pattern, you need to make sure that your pattern is the actual width of your fabric, because this fabric said 54, but in fact, we got a really big salvage here. This should have been sewn right there side by side so that it would look like that one right there, not that far apart. See that? So we'll get into repeats and pattern fabric shortly. So that should have been sewn like that. Just some notes for you to know. And this up here, half your fabric is in your space. That gives you your width. And the rest of your fabric is put up in your pleats. And you have to have about as much in the pleat as you do in the space. So that means you need at least 2 times the amount of fabric as the window is, as the rod is wide. So I got that all down in a formula in here on a card so you can see it. We'll go to that next. Okay, we went over what all of this terminology means, rod, return, overlap, and that. So now I'm going to show you how to take the measurements that we took from the rod and there and turn them into how much yardage you need. So the formula, I wrote it sort of like an old time algebra problem, so that maybe you could stay with me a little bit better. So you got your rod plus your return, and for a pair you'll have two, one on each end. So your return times 2 plus your overlap, that'll equal your finished width. That means that our rod was 77, our return was 3, so our return times 2 is 6. Our overlap was 3 inches, so you add those 3 together. That gives you your finished width of your finished product, 86 inches. Now you really should allow 2.5 times fullness. So that gives you plenty of, it'll be plenty wide enough to go from side to side. You'll have nice full pleats. So 86 times 2.5 equals 215 inches is what we need. Okay, so your 215 inches, remember this is all working across the top of the drape. This determines how many widths you need. Most fabrics are 54, but you have to check. Some can be as much as 118 wide. Some can be as little as 32 to 36 wide. The most common ones are 48 and 54. Now what we're working with for that drape was 54. So you take the 215 inches, divide that by 54. That tells you you need 4 widths, because it's just like 3.9 something. Anyway, you need 4 widths to make that drape. Always round up in a situation like that. So 4 widths is needed to make that drape to do a 77 finished width. 77 plus your return plus your overlap gives you finished width times 2.5 full. 1 time full would be flat. The extra 1.5 full gives you the fabrics you needed, the fabric you need for your pleats, your return, your overlap, all that kind of thing. So round up, 4 widths are needed for that. So you take the 4 widths, start with your finished length, 89, add 12. 12 is a good all-around figure for this. If you have a really, really long drape, like over 120 inches, you might want to go with this 12 inches allows for a double 4-inch hem. Now, double 4-inch hem might sound like a lot, but it's a big investment. So if you were to repaint your room and decide to move it straight to another room and need to be a little bit longer, you got an extra 8 inches in that hem. You can make an adjustment, let it down, make it longer, and in the meantime, a double 4-inch hem on a roundabout 100-inch drape adds just enough weight so everything hangs really well. So, and then the other 4 inches of this 12 is what we use in the header. So 89 is our finished length, add 12, gives us a cut length. Cut length, very important. You got 2 sets of figures, your finished and your cut. So it gives you a cut length of 101, and with the last page we determine we need 4 widths, so 101 inches is our cut length times 4 cuts comes to 404 inches. Divide that 404 by 36, because when you buy a piece of fabric, you get the whole width. 36 inches all the way across. So you divide that by 36, means we need 12 yards to do that project. We get that 12 yards, cut into 4 panels, sew them 2 and 2. That gives us a pair, and then we proceed. I'll be doing a video coming up about how to actually make a pleated drape. That'll be coming out real soon. Now, the only other thing we wanted to talk about today was pleats and pin settings. Okay, there's several different kinds of pleats. You can see here on the top, you've got a 2-point pleat, that's called a Euro pleat, 3-point pleat. You can do a pencil pleat. If you do a pencil pleat like this, then you need a little less fabric. You really only have to go 1.5 times full. But for any of these pleats, you should go ahead and just do 2.5 times full. There's different ways to tack them. This is your regular old conventional pleat like this, tacked at the bottom. 3-point, 2-point. Now the difference in a 3 and a 2, once they're dressed out, with a 3-point pleat, the center comes out and all of this goes flat, so you got a really pretty finished stack back, or when they're hanging, it just looks really good. Now with a 2-point pleat, because you don't have that center, you kind of end up with this. So you can consider that. And it's the same amount of fabric either way. Just indicate or decide for yourself, you're doing it yourself, how you'd like to do that. And then you have a pleat that's tacked at the top. See, it's still 3 points, but it's open down here instead of being up here. So it's just whatever you think looks the best. And then of course there's a 2-point tacked at the top. That kind of covers pleats. There's a couple others, a goblet pleat and this and that, so, but these are your basic standard ones. Now about the pin setting. For the ring application that we did in there, this drape will be right up at the bottom of that ring. So you want this pin to also be right at the top. Then you have like the decorative rods you get from a decorator that are like traverse rods with a wood pole looking in the front. You need just a little bit here because you have a carrier. So this is set down just a little bit more. Then this one is called ceiling mount. It's set here because most traverse rods are 1 inch wide. The wide ones, it's got the carriers that slide back and forth. So you set this pin down here so that this drape actually covers that rod. Because you have your little carrier hanging down here, and this will hook in that, and the rod will be behind right here. Now it's called ceiling mount because sometimes you set your drapes right up to the ceiling. So if you had a traverse rod, it was set to the ceiling, then you couldn't go any bigger than this or this would drag on the ceiling. Then you have a wall mount. That's where your rod's where it is and you got plenty of wall above it. You can go a little deeper with your pin, and this will extend up a little further above your rod, so that your rod's about that wide. So you'd have a little extra sticking above your rod. And that's all your pin settings amount to. Now, standard pin settings are for a workroom. They're either a state, that's the pretty ones you get from the decorator that has the wood pole in front, got the little carriers underneath. That's 1 5/8. A decorative rod is like a pole in the video with rings and that stuff. You go 1 1/2. Like this. So it's up closer to the top. Put your drape right up to your ring. And this will put it right up to your pole if you got one of the state rods that they're a little pricey. You can get them. And then your ceiling mount is 2 7/8, and your wall is 3 1/4. And that is how it's done.